we're not done yet. All we've succeeded in doing is identifying the problem, capturing the details, communicating that there is a problem, done everything we can to resolve it, and now identified the impacts of changing the dimensions of your project beyond what's been agreed. That's a lot, but there's more to do. Is your project plan irretrievably beyond schedule? Are project costs turning out to be greater than the agreed budget? Are the forecasted project benefits turning out to be a work of fantasy? Has your client asked for new scope, or have you discovered that you can't deliver what's already been promised? Don't worry, it happens to everyone. And here's how we fix it. I'm Stuart Taylor and I make videos about project management. If that's your thing, hit the subscribe button. This video is about the change control process. Simply put, change control is the process where you can get permission to alter the agreed dimensions of your project in some way. So if you need to change the plan, the budget, the scope, and so on, this is the process you need to follow. However, it can be a little tricky to explain. You see, the process for change control will vary greatly based on the complexity and maturity of your project environment. You may need to just go and get the approval of your sponsor, or you may need to go and get the approval of a board, or you may need to go to several boards. Stick with me though, I'm going to give you my advice, which should help you no matter how complex the situation. If your project has any level of control, someone besides the project manager will have signed up to its budget, timescales, scope, benefits, quality. There may be other things they've signed up to depending on the project, such as levels of risk, use of specific named resources and vendors, and so on. The decision maker that signed up to these things may be your project sponsor, or it could be the project board, or it could be a program board, or an investment board, or it could be any combination of these potential decision makers. Whoever it is, just for the purpose of this video, let's call them the decision makers for now, and accept that maybe there's one of them or maybe there's many of them. Because the decision makers have signed up to those dimensions, the budget, the timescales, and so on, that means you can't change them without informing the decision makers and seeking their approval. For this process to work, you really have to put yourself into their shoes. They've signed up to the project and handed over the day-to-day running of it to you. If they discover later on that you've delivered the project but it's a year late, or costs twice as much money, or only delivers half of what was expected, they'll rightly determine that you've done a bad job, and possibly they'll be judged to have done a bad job too. So if those dimensions change, and over a long enough amount of time, some of them are likely to change, then you have to go and let them know. Depending on the rules of your governance, you may have to notify them as soon as there's a realistic threat to those dimensions. Keep that in mind. Even if it's not in the rules, it's good practice to inform them. I'm going to talk through a scenario now that should help you to understand this. Everything I'm going to share will be applicable to any of these dimensions changing, the scope, the costs, and so on. But going forward, just for simplicity in explaining it, I'm going to refer to the plan being late. Okay, let's get into the details as you, the project manager, discover your project is behind schedule. I would expect that before you do anything else, that you identify this problem as an issue and capture it with all the required detail in the issue log. Do some basic analysis of it to judge how big of a problem it is. In our example, it's a delay. Let's say that the supplier you have a dependency on is going to be late handing over a product to you. As a result, your project plan has shifted to the right. Start to look at how to resolve or minimize the issue. Do what you can within the limits of your own authority and then escalate if necessary. By this stage, you should let the sponsor know what's going on. You really don't want to surprise them in a steering committee meeting with this information. Keep them informed of the problem and what you're doing to resolve it. Whilst you're applying your actions to resolve the issue, start looking at the impact. In this example, your project will be late. That's certainly not good news, but how bad it is will be determined by the impact it has. Does this delay mean that some critical product, tool, or process will be late getting into the organization's hands? Is that an inconvenience or is it catastrophic? For example, does this mean that higher profitability will be delayed? Or does it mean that your organization is now violating the law? Then consider other impacts. Usually, a longer project will come at greater cost. So not only is the dimension of the plan out, but now your budget may be out as well. A delay also means that resources will be held up on your project for longer, which is most likely what's driving up those costs. But their lack of availability may delay other projects in the portfolio. By managing the issue, you're trying to reduce all of these impacts as much as you can, but you may only be able to get so far before you need to change some of the project's agreed dimensions. For example, you may be able to still deliver on time if you increase the resources on the later stages of the project. That additional cost and allocation of resources needs to be approved by your decision maker. Or you may be able to remove some of the scope of the project so that only the most critical parts are delivered, which would allow the project to complete on time. As you'd be delivering less than the decision makers had signed up to, you need to get them to approve this new scope. Or it could just be that the project schedule has to be changed to reflect the delay and you need the decision makers to approve your new schedule. With all of that in mind, you should now have a change that you want to recommend to the decision makers. But we're not done yet. All we've succeeded in doing is identifying the problem, capturing the details, communicating that there is a problem, done everything we can to resolve it, and now identified the impacts of changing the dimensions of your project beyond what's been agreed. That's a lot, but there's more to do. One thing you can change right now with only positive impacts is the state of your like button. If this video is helping, then give it a click. You'll need to capture all of these details in a change request document. Your organization may have a standard one for use, but if not, I'll make a template that you can use in a future video. Just keep an eye out and look at the description of this video for a link for when it's ready. The change request template will encourage you to capture all of the detail you possibly can about the change you're asking to make. It covers the details of the issue, the cause, the recommendation you're making to redimension the project, and its impacts. You need to take that change request to the decision makers and use it to inform them of the change you're asking for approval of. Whether that's just your sponsor, a project board, or whatever governance forum, they'll have questions. Just because I'm talking about this in a relaxed manner, don't assume this is trivial. You're going to have to tell some pretty senior people that things haven't worked out the way they were intended, and that's going to draw scrutiny. They may have hard questions about why this happened, whether initial estimations were flawed and why, or whether things have changed and why. I'm not telling you this to scare you, I'm telling you to prepare you. They may not be blaming you, but it could be an uncomfortable conversation, so make sure to drill yourself on everything they can possibly ask you, such as the cause, the recommendations, and the implications, and possibly on how to continuously improve so that these problems can be avoided in the future. Keep in mind, part of the reason they're asking these questions is because they may face similar questions from their bosses, and they may have to justify why they're giving you more time or more money. They need to be able to maintain the confidence of their bosses and peers in just the same way that you do. So face the questions with preparation and confidence, give sufficiently detailed explanations, provide supporting information if needed, and most importantly, be honest. If you got something wrong, then be honest about it and explain why you got it wrong. In most cases, what we've just discussed is sufficient to get a change request approved and to complete most change control processes. There is more though, so don't disappear. I just want to add that before getting to the last steps, that there are some programs and portfolios that have such detailed interdependencies and complexity that additional steps are required in the process. An example is if your change request is impacting the technologies used by your organization. You may need to share the details with a technical design authority first, especially if the change relates to the scope or quality of the outputs. Another is that change control may have a dedicated governance forum. I remember going for a job interview with a bank that was starting up a program to deliver compliance after Brexit. They'd established a change control function that had to have dedicated resources managing it to ensure the program delivered properly. So if you work in such a complex environment, take a moment to see if your change request has to be approved by anyone else. It's not unusual in these situations for these requests to require multiple approvals, and the sequence of those approvals is something you need to be aware of before you start sending change request forms around the business. Okay, so you've got your change request approved and you've nearly completed the change control process. After notifying the impacted parties that the request was approved, your next step is to re-baseline the impacted project documents. In the case of our example, this would mean your project plan gets updated with new dates and possibly some other documents that feature key dates will need to be updated. Apply version control to the document, but pro tip, in the plan, make sure to include a note against each of the impacted milestones that have been changed by the change request and its unique ID. Update the summary of your issue and close it, and when you write your next status report, instead of seeing red everywhere, you can change it back to green. For now, at least. Something I must remind you of, going through the change control process requires a lot of work. It can also be very stressful, and if done too often can give the impression that you're not really in control of the project. So my recommendation would be to try your best to avoid these situations as much as possible with effective risk management. And to achieve that, you may want to look at this video on the risk management process. It's really good. I made it.